Sometimes you want a son, an heir, but you get a daughter. Will she prove her worth if she's her father's daughter? It's a hard road she must travel as a future princess. These are the words her father said to the girl on her 5th birthday. The Urfinen Empire is ruled by a great nobility, but its power is now in the distant past. The imperialists, led by the emperor, were in fierce opposition to the aristocrats, fighting for power in the empire. In the midst of this, a girl was born, and she was born into the Martian family, who were in direct conversion with the imperialists of the Urfinen family, and she is to become the next princess of the Martian family and lead the aristocratic faction. The girl was undergoing rigorous training, communication skill, behavior skill, estate management skill, and swordsmanship. The atmosphere of a fairy tale ball reigned on all sides. Everything had to be flawless. Mistakes were unacceptable. In this respect, the life of the girl's nemesis was no different from her own. The girl's enemy was Crown Prince Tyr Urfinen of Siratica, the heir to the Urfinen Empire, whom she would eventually have to defeat. Her father thought the girl was ready in her 9 years, and on this evening, the Crown Prince's birthday, when as well as she was 10 years old, she was going out for the first time. This event was both her first public appearance and her first visit to the palace. Beatrice would see the prince for the first time, and everything on this evening had to go flawlessly. As the ball began, a new era began, one in which it didn't matter whether Beatrice wanted it or not. In the crowded ballroom, all eyes were fixed on the young Beatrice, the future princess and the best swordswoman for her age. The girl felt like a doll and did not want to stay at the ball all night. The girl was looking for only one thing with her eyes: the prince. She was only able to see him when he was introduced for all to see. He struck Beatrice with his appearance: Siraethika Tyr Urfinen, pale skin, silver hair, and piercing blue eyes. She curtsied. The girl realized that in front of her was the target, the crown prince, whom she must kill, or he would kill her. Despite this, Beatrice's heart was heavy with unfamiliar feelings. Maybe it was these hidden feelings that stirred her heart so much. 10 years later, even before Beatrice and Siraethika turned 20, Siraethika was shaken by violent clashes for power. On the floor sat Beatrice. Her hands clutching the hilt of her sword were covered in blood. It is said that a blade that has tasted its master's blood howls in agony. Beatrice could not afford that weakness. She could not simply surrender, for death at the hands of her enemy would be too easy a reward, too coveted. For Beatrice, the fall of the palace was a defeat, the years of plan she'd spent grinding to dust. Her father craved power, and for her, battle was the only choice available, a fate destined from birth. The door opened. Siraethik entered the room. It was the first time he had ever called her by name. Until then, she had been nothing more than a faceless tool to him, a weapon in her father's hands. Beatrice was amused at how despondently he said her name. Shouldn't he be cheering? Siraethika considered her a worthy opponent. Beatrice wanted to congratulate him on his ascension to the throne. The future ruler was dead. Siraethika found everything that had happened to Beatrice unfair. But did she have a choice? All she had to do now was congratulate the future emperor who recognized her. Did she want his recognition? Sometimes Beatrice imagined how she would have served him as a loyal knight if she had been born into an ordinary family. How would her fate have turned out then? The girl said goodbye to him. She enjoyed their duels as much as he did, and his seeming indifference did not cause her negativity. Now the hour of her death had come. Or was it just her imagination? The girl woke up to the strange words being spoken to her, as if she was part of the royal family. She was in a luxurious room that was flooded with bright light. The room was luxurious. It surprised her, but what struck her the most was the realization that she was alive. Hadn't she died just a short time ago? How had she gotten to this place? Stunned, the girl tried to realize where she was. She groped her face, still feeling confused. Beatrice tried to stand up, but everything was floating before her eyes. She gradually realized her position and stood up, but suddenly she felt as if she were floating on water. She was dizzy from this strange sensation and lost her perception. Nice princess room, and in the mirror Beatrice sees the princess. She can't believe her eyes, seeing a different face in the mirror. The girl was distracted from shock by the voice of the maid who woke her up. She had already decided that Beatrice had had a bad dream, and that's why she was acting so strangely. The maid was concerned about the behavior of her princess. Beatrice realized that it would look suspicious, but she decided to ask her name. But the maid reacted strangely calm, as if the name to forget is nothing. Beatrice recognized the name of her body as Schreiner Flor Soilem. Beatrice had never heard of such a state, and the maid decided to be her guide until her memories returned to her. As it turns out, Sollum is a small but prosperous state. The land is fertile and full of agriculture. Beatrice realized that this place was very peaceful and that 5 whole years had passed since her death. It was 1290, the 10th of February, and very soon the princess would have her 20th birthday. The joyful demeanor of the maid resembled that of a dog, a golden retriever. Beatrice thought it was madness. Even more, she was surprised by the calmness of the servants. Apparently, Schreiner did not have a high intelligence. The only thing that stressed her was that she was calm. Suddenly, the servants remembered that the princess is waiting for the king-father for breakfast and began to tidy up Beatrice. The servants were trying to get the girl cleaned up as quickly as possible. Beatrice looked around herself. Peachy hair, blushing cheeks, and very feminine. Beatrice concluded that it was warm all year round. Even though the leaves on the trees were green in February, she had no idea that such places existed at all. Would Beatrice have the same tender feelings for Sira Ethica? I wonder how he is. The aristocrat faction was wiped out 5 years ago. Now the whole world should be at his feet. Now Beatrice had to think about breakfast and how not to arouse the king's suspicions. She had to be careful. Lily was just a naive maid who could be fooled, but the royal family was another matter. Once at the table, Beatrice was shocked. She was struck by the royal family's lack of manners, and these people rule Salem. It was like a farmer's feast, no other way. The food on the table was ordinary food, the kind of food she had never seen on a royal table. Maybe they just looked so nice. One of the girls decided to continue the conversation. Beatrice thought that now there will be political talk and need to be extremely serious. But what was her surprise when the conversation took a completely different direction? The title of Miss Tomato. The girls in the room began to argue about who would have what title. One wanted to be Miss Potato and the other Miss Tomato. As the third sister asked for some peace. Weird vegetable titles. Are they serious? It's a madhouse, Beatrice thought, as the royal family sat on the edges of the huge table and sat cold-faced. And these people are friendly, and sit next to each other and eat a frugal meal, and act friendly and casual and easy, and the parents look at their arguing daughters with amusement. Beatrice decides that all this is complete madness, and maybe she is unconscious, hovering somewhere in the ether. Maybe it is the tricks of the fairies that should escort her to another world, and all this is not. And everything she sees is an illusion created by the fairies. Either way, it all made a lot more sense than what was happening. The Queen Mother noticed that her daughter was quiet and suggested that she was probably not hungry. Her father marvelled that her daughter had matured overnight and had become so stately and reserved, but still a beautiful girl. And how should Beatrice deal with this situation? Beatrice wanted to argue that she was no longer a child, but her new voice still sounded unfamiliar to her. The girl's words provoked laughter from the rest of the family, and she was even told that she had been Miss Peach last year, which finally disgusted Beatrice. Her shock was blamed on embarrassment, and assured Beatrice that she was a beautiful Miss Peach. Her cute makeup and dress made her look like a doll. The sisters convinced her that she was a beautiful peach. Beatrice was beginning to miss her old self, confused by their warm relationship and still believing it was the fairies' doing. She was distracted by the sound of the bell. The butler ran into the room. The grey-haired man was extremely frightened and worried. He came with bad news. War had broken out, and Beatrice's old acquaintances, the Urfians, were attacking them. The bloodthirsty Emperor Siriethica is leading his army straight into the capital. Beatrice was shocked that an old enemy was about to invade the capital. He was like the moon and radiated a soft, serene white light. A dangerous, alluring and beautiful man. His emotionless face prevented anyone from reading his thoughts. Thoughts of him being Beatrice's enemy prevented her from showing all that respect for him. The man she knew was invading her life. What had happened in those 5 years? Why would he want such a small kingdom? Even without warning, it wasn't like him. This is not the man, Beatrice knew. The butler was in a panic. He didn't know what to do. And the king? Strangely enough, the king remained completely calm, and even expected that sooner or later his state would be attacked. Beatrice was surprised that the kingdom was attacked so suddenly. The king's wife only scolded her husband. He should have practiced more diplomacy. Erfinen had never shown any interest in such a small state, but it was probably known that he was not insecure. Unfortunately for Beatrice, no one took the war seriously. On the contrary, they were upset that there would be no nomination for Miss Vegetable. It's a 200-year-old tradition. Beatrice was shocked that they were not worried that there would be a war, but that there would not be a nomination. Normal people would have been trembling and shaking with fear long ago. Strangely, no one was afraid. The king thought they were perfectly safe, and their rich history was proof of that. Beatrice didn't think they had any defense against enemy attack. The state looked unarmed. The sisters wanted to change into other outfits. They were excited. The girls were so eager to see the men of Erfinen, for there are so many handsome men there. Beatrice had already resigned herself to it. Be it what it will, they are incorrigible. Beatrice was excited to see him. When she saw him, Beatrice noted that it was the same beautiful face. Sirethica asked if the man in front of him was King Solom. Beatrice noted that his voice had deepened and he was even taller, more masculine. If so, and she could see him, then everything that was happening was real. The girls whispered and wondered what had brought the Erythians to themselves. Maybe they were starving. Beatrice wished the sisters would stop, for alas, they were perfectly audible and only made everyone look bad. Beatrice was uneasy. Did they even realize they were being heard? Only Beatrice realized that the guests were dangerous. Sirethica smirked and signaled that the royal family had amused him, and then he could give them a choice. Sirethica raised his sword and put it to the king's neck. He wanted the king to make a choice. Either he was with him or die. Beatrice thought Sirethica had gone mad. How much had he conquered in all these 5 years? Could all those bloody battles have made him insane? This behaviour was not like the Sirethica she knew. Beatrice stood up to Sirethica and the king. It was hard to say why. Maybe because she was starting to feel warm feelings for the family, or because Sirethica was her enemy. She didn't understand why she chose to protect the king. Sirethica wondered if there was anything to say to the princess. Her reckless behaviour only amused him. Beatrice had a lot to say, such as that she wasn't going to accept his ridiculous decision, that how could he come with troops on an unarmed state, and it didn't do him any honour. The royal family was shocked that the princess did such a bold act. Sirethica decided that her act was funny, and Beatrice had not yet learned fear by doing so. Beatrice preferred to take his words about recklessness as a compliment. Sirethica wondered how dare the princess of a small state behave like that in front of the emperor. Beatrice wondered if he really intended to kill them. If so, they would have been dead long ago. His threats to an unarmed kingdom does no honour to the Erfinian people, and Beatrice understood that Sirethica already knew that very well. Sirethica asked her name. Suddenly her family was outraged. Her sisters rushed to hug Beatrice and were angry. How dare he ask her name and why he needed this information? Just because he is handsome does not give him the right to behave like that, and let him take his sword away from Schreiner. The girl almost forgot that her name is Beatrice. The king was angry. How dare he raise his sword on his daughter and ordered him to drop the sword? Strangely enough, he obeyed the king's order and put the sword away. It was obvious from Sirethica's face, but he was very excited. Beatrice understood his excitement. She herself had never met such a family. Beatrice was a little annoyed. She was in no danger, and she had started it all. She wanted everyone to calm down and not panic. Everyone rushed to her, worried about the girl, how she was, and if she was all right. Beatrice walked up to Sirethica and curtsied gracefully and said her new name. She was Schreiner Flor Solim. Since he was not planning to kill, why not go indoors and talk inside? Although it was not customary to call uninvited guests into the palace, and even those who threatened with a sword. But if the situation was so, it was not necessary to make a contract in the court. Sirethica agreed with Beatrice and withdrew his troops. Beatrice understood that he didn't want to kill them, but what purpose did he come for? What benefit to the small state? Beatrice didn't understand the reason for Sirethica's behaviour. She knew that the Erfinen didn't want to kill Solom, or he couldn't hurt them. Most likely they have what Sirethica needs, and that's why he can't do anything to them. What could it be? Beatrice didn't know the answer, the mounting tension making her heart beat faster, exactly as it had on the day of their battle. Beatrice's sisters peppered Cyriaithica with silly questions. But how does he take care of his skin? And another sister warned them that she was watching him. Cyriaithica was indifferent to their questions. He seemed to be adjusting to them. They asked him how he takes care of his skin. Entering the room, Cyriaithica noticed that the room was cramped, to which the king replied that it was cosy and laughed in a friendly manner. Beatrice noticed her acquaintance Maximilian the treasurer, a traitor from a previous life. He seemed to be out of sorts. The king wondered why they had come all the way here. Beatrice looked at him. She wondered why he was here. The girl did not trust him, maybe because she knew him and still could not believe him. She could not understand what emotions he was hiding. Cyriaithica was always cold and secretive. Beatrice wanted to know him so badly. What kind of hole had she left in his heart when she died? How had he lived all this time, these 5 years? Unfortunately, she could no longer ask herself that question, because she was no longer Beatrice. She was now Schreiner, and she should not care how Cyriaithica had lived all those 5 years. Maximilian submitted the agreement to the king. Beatrice realized that usually such agreements were not beneficial to the country, and one could expect anything. The girl wondered if the soulfulness and kindness of these people would remain. Would they be themselves? Beatrice had a feeling that if they changed, she would hate him. She would not be able to forgive him. Cyriaithica looked at her as if studying her. Beatrice noticed it quickly. He kept his eyes on her. He clarified her name as if he had forgotten her name, which surprised Beatrice a little. Their eye contact was broken by the king. The contract seemed to him extremely wonderful, and the terms just fine and most importantly favourable. Beatrice was shocked. How could the contract be favourable? Beatrice's confusion was noticed by Cyriaithicus as well. He even asked what surprised her. Doesn't she know how rich these lands are? His words seemed flattering to the royal family. Beatrice is tense and thinks this is not the time to brag. It turns out Solomon produces 30% of the continent's food. All the local people are descendants of the great temple, and that's why everything blooms miraculously here. The local people are the high priests of the earth deity. They are a real miracle. Does Princess Schreiner understand the history of her people? Beatrice was embarrassed. She had only today learned of the existence of this little country. How can she know the history? He treats her like a child. The king was confused by this suddenness. He did not understand what benefit to Cyriaithica. After all, the terms were too favourable to Solomon. Cyriaithica's face became serious. It was all about the sorcerers. Solomon had attracted the attention of all the serious nations. But the first to lay their eyes on Solomon were the sorcerers. Solomon's sanctity had attracted the attention of the sorcerers. And if Solomon fell, there was a high risk of famine for the entire continent, and that could not be allowed to happen. The king was embarrassed by the treaty, as if it had been written for a friend and not for a controlled state. Maximilian decided to put in his 5 cents. Yes, the king is right. It's just that Solomon is seen as a friendly ally, and by signing the contract, the country will receive support from Erfinen for the next 20 years. Cyriaithica was offering security to Solomon. Beatrice realized that Solomon had become the center of interest of all the nations, and it was because of its riches despite its small size. They just want to get it as soon as possible, the fastest, and they are lucky to offer their protection. Beatrice looks at her old acquaintance and realizes that Maximilian has not changed. He is as cunning as a fox. Beatrice concludes that the sorcerers have probably moved sooner than expected, and Cyriaithica confirms her fears. The sorcerers want to break the divine power and plunge the whole world into chaos by means of starvation. Beatrice began to worry. How could they trust him? How could they trust the words of a man who had invaded a foreign country? Cyriaithica contradicted her, but Beatrice knows that he is not lying and is honest with her. How does he know that Beatrice trusts him in her heart? Cyriaithica apologized. He knew he shouldn't have done that. He explained his behavior by saying that he didn't know what to expect from Solomon's men, and that this was just a friendship agreement, nothing more. But Beatrice suspected there was more to it. But what was it? Beatrice knew him too well and realized that Cyriaithica clearly needed something else. But what was it? Unfortunately, the king trusted him and decided that not signing the contract would be a lot of trouble. It would be foolish not to sign the contract, and the queen was in complete agreement with her husband. Cyriathika agrees that the contract is too good for Solom and needs to add a couple of clauses. Beatrice realized that here, he must say what he wanted without hiding. And he said, as emperor, he wished to have a member of the Solom family in his lineage, and apparently he had a wide choice, 4 brides to choose from. All he had to do was choose. His words stunned everyone in the room. Even Maximilian was clearly unaware of his plans. It was as if he had been slapped in the face. He just froze silently. The king stood up and asked, did he really want one of his daughters to be his consort? Beatrice was expecting the king to flare up, the threat of war, and a daughter. And as a father and a king, he must realize how terrible and wrong it is. But his reaction completely discouraged the girl. He rejoiced and already dreamed of grandchildren with the queen. The sisters immediately began to argue about who would be the bride, each wanting to be the spouse of such a beautiful man and sweetheart. Beatrice was confused and stood aside in mute shock. Is she alone in realizing the absurdity of the situation? The girl noticed how he openly mocked her. A little more and one of them would become his spouse, and they all would not give a damn. Cyriathika told everyone that he thought it would be logical to observe each of the girls to make a choice. He plans to stay with them for a few months to get to know them all. He wants to get to know them intimately, very intimately. While Cyriathika was saying these words, he looked directly at Beatrice. To her, his harmless words seemed like threats. Cyriathika's belongings were being carried through the portal. Beatrice looked at the portal puzzled. Cyriathika noticed this as well. Beatrice asked why he wanted someone from the Solom family, when there are much better prospects and profitable alliances. Cyriathika answered that he just wants, and that's all. He has the right to get what he wants because he is the emperor. But what does he really want? Beatrice couldn't understand that, she wondered. What if he liked one of her sisters? What if he has a thing for innocent and pure girls? But it was not like him. She knew him in a different way. He was simply indifferent to others, seemingly uninterested in women. Beatrice was torn from her musings by Cyriathika's voice, who thought that since he had said everything, he could continue to make himself comfortable. Cyriathika sent Maximilian back. He could not leave his state all alone. Beatrice began to feel as if Cyriathika wanted to get rid of Maximilian. Cyriathika noticed Beatrice scrutinizing the back of his head. It seemed that just a little more, and she would carve words into the back of his head. Beatrice even fell into a stupor. How did he realize she was looking at him? The girl wondered, how could he even take to leaving his state for such a long time? Cyriathika wondered why Solom was so concerned about Erfinen's fate. Beatrice went into a stupor. She still wanted to treat him like she used to, but how hard it was not to cross the line. She couldn't say anything back to him either. Cyriathika answered her that she could not worry. Erfien is a strong state, and a month is nothing. He has made his state so strong and can be confident. Confidence in his own empire is a great portrait of himself and reflects his personal authority. Things are not what they used to be, and Cyriathika has changed a lot, from just watching the factions to being a strong and powerful emperor, so confident that he knows no one will take his place until he is in place. Beatrice noticed that he had changed a lot and was different. In fact, Beatrice had always wanted to see him on the throne. He would be a good ruler to count on. She realized that she had probably missed too much. What had she missed? She was pulled from her thoughts by the servant's words. Cyriathika's room was ready for her. The room seemed a little small to him, which he said immediately. Beatrice was struck by his frankness. He was straightforward and honest. Cyriathika thanked her for her concern and promised to meet her again. Erfiren had become more beautiful than it was. The country was richer. It was like a garden, except that its soil was fertilized with the blood of nobles like Beatrice. She wanted to burst into applause, singing its greatness, a strange feeling. Beatrice realized that she was no longer angry at him for killing her. Remembering the past, the girl recalled how she had once been told that their relationship was like love and hate, strong and frightening. Such a relationship creates the strongest attachment, and alas, it had arisen in her without her knowledge. Beatrice went into shock. Cyriathika decided to have a date with each princess to get to know each one better. He wanted to get to know them better. Beatrice didn't even realize that this applied to her as well. Beatrice didn't hate him anymore, but going on a date with him was too much. Beatrice thought that she was not on the list of candidates. After her prank, she asked Lily if her parents would allow it. She assured her that her parents would be in favour, and she could not worry. Beatrice thought that it was probably just a formality, and she would never become his wife, but she imagined him and her getting married, and she even felt sick. Lily put it down to the excitement of the future date. At the table, Tiran's older sister asked Sirethik how he liked the garden. He appreciated the flowers in the garden, and Tiara reminded him that there was delicious fruit. Beatrice thought she was the perfect candidate for Sirethika. She was the oldest of them, and she was also 1 year younger than the emperor himself. She was only 24. Tiara promised him that he would never find more delicious fruit than at their place. Beatrice thought she was a good girl, even if she was pushy. The other sister reminded her that she was not to be forgotten, and had something to show for it. There was something of the cat in Irene. She was just as sweet, but she couldn't catch the same wave as the others. She was young and beautiful. She was only 23 years old. The third sister, Tibble, also decided to remind herself. She had a boat, and she thought she could ride on the boat. This gift was given to her a long time ago, and she considered the boat the most precious thing she had. Tibble was thrilled, and the boat was the most precious thing to her. Beatrice thinks she's the sweetest and prettiest of them all, except she's a little rowdy, and she's the chattiest of them all. All the princesses were 1 year apart. Amazingly, the girls were born one after the other. As they say around here, all men without exception are high priests of divine power. By fertility, they must have meant more than just land. Suddenly it became quiet, and everyone looked at Beatrice. They were waiting for her to tell them how she was going to spend the date. The sisters thought the emperor had made her nervous, which shocked Beatrice. Why would they even think that? As if she needed him so badly that she could have him for herself. Kyriathika decided that Beatrice didn't care about him. At least he understood that. The sisters began to resent him. No woman would dare to refuse a man as handsome as him. Beatrice just wanted to sit in her room with her book, not to be disturbed, that's all. She made it clear to the others that she just wanted everyone to have a good time. That's all. Sirethika wouldn't want to be married to a man who hates him. Sirethika wondered what their date would be. Beatrice felt uncomfortable, that look again. It seemed to bore a hole in her, piercing blue eyes looking straight at her, innocent and pure eyes. She couldn't believe that this man had done so many terrible things, and once again their fates were intertwined. Those eyes were her weakest point. He looked at her the same way he did when they first met. So what does the demure princess want to do on a date with him? Beatrice was upset. He spoiled the whole atmosphere, didn't let her be in her thoughts. Beatrice didn't want to do anything and make up her own mind, which is what she made Sirethik realize. They would go wherever Sirehetikus wanted them to go. The sisters watched with interest at the scene that unfolded before them. Shirethika was indignant. He doesn't know Solemn. How can he choose a place? He would want the girl to choose the place. He won't become a girl after a date, right? Beatrice made a remark that the joke was stupid. Beatrice rarely goes out. She prefers to stay in her room. Sirethika decided that the best idea would be to have the date in Beatrice's room, which puzzled the girl. And everyone else found it intriguing, which did not like Beatrice. She expected a negative reaction, because it is indecent. Everyone chirped that it was even too romantic to pursue a girl in such a way, but she was a modest and timid girl, and such a thing would frighten a girl. This enraged Beatrice, and she turned the table over with indignation. She was sick of all this love. Shirethika took such an exuberant reaction as agreement, and he would look forward to their lovely reunion. How she wished someone would stop that crazy emperor. In her room the girl sat quietly and read, and her maid Lily was extremely happy. Even Beatrice noticed it. The girl couldn't understand why Lily was so happy. She must have snuck into the kitchen again. But alas, no, the reason was quite different. Lily was avoiding the question. She was just happy about the flowers. Beatrice had never seen such brightly coloured tulips. The flowers were beautiful. Beatrice decided to ask if everyone had a farming ability. Lily didn't understand what Beatrice meant at first. She had never seen a plant wither, and it was hard for her to imagine it. Beatrice realised that the gift was like that for all the inhabitants. The blessing fell on all the inhabitants of Solemn. In this place, Plants always continued to bloom continuously, and even with the lack of military might, they managed to build a powerful history and avoid invasion by outside nations. They even managed to get away without riots in the country. It's just a miracle of some kind. If all of this is true, then it is likely that Beatrice herself has a divine gift, though she is not an original specimen, if I may say so. But still. But she's in Schroina's body, isn't she? So anything is possible. Shryona's behaviour amazed Lily. She never joked like that. As much as Lily wanted to change the subject, nothing worked. Beatrice began to press the girl. She noted that Beatrice was observant lately, and she had to tell everything. So Beatrice learned that Princess Irene and the Emperor went to the market. The princess wanted to show him fruits and vegetables. Beatrice thinks that this is at least naive. No one has ever tried to seduce a man like that. And then the Emperor wanted to buy wild flowers. Beatrice was shocked by this. The girl did not recognize the Emperor. To all the female servants, this behavior seemed quite nice. As far as the love of agriculture is strong, so good a man, so think all the people of Solemn. Beatrice had never thought that a man as rugged as Cyriethica could love flowers. So, what does Lily's good mood have to do with it? And the fact that everyone is sure in Lily's victory, it is her princess who will become the consort of the Emperor. Beatrice couldn't understand why she was the ideal candidate to be the Emperor's consort. Because there is no one better at farming than Shroina, making her the perfect consort. Princess Tirana's flowers don't work out. Princess Irene's fruit is sour, and Princess Tiabal's flowers always smell bad. Shroina was Miss Peach for a reason. Beatrice wondered if they were talking about princesses and not experienced farmers. She felt uncomfortable. She could do with some quiet. And what a humiliation it was to watch her break down over such a trifle, though she had been an unflappable princess before. Beatrice sharply told Lily to leave her alone, to which the girl reacted very vulnerably. Lily didn't expect Beatrice to raise her voice. It had never happened before. Beatrice was confused. She did not want to offend the girl, and explained to her that she did not want to shout at her. And the princess explained that the Emperor would not look for just a nice girl. He needed a strong and strong-willed woman, not just a good farmer. Lily objected to her. On the contrary, loving farming is a good reason to be together. Loving plants equals being a prospective partner for someone who grows plants. Beatrice decided that this place was getting crazier and crazier by the minute. Beatrice said she had no intention of marrying the Emperor and didn't want to leave here at all. Beatrice didn't want to go anywhere. She was happy with her life in the palace, to which Lily answered her that earlier Beatrice had dreamed of going to the desert to see if anything would grow there. What kind of person was Shroina? Beatrice didn't want what the princess wanted. All the more likely she was already on bad terms with the Emperor. Lily objected. Her parents explained that this behaviour was due to her shyness and modesty. Beatrice began to ask Lily not to do anything, but the girl said that everything had already been done by the Queen's order, and showed that flowers had been placed in the girl's room, and there were peach petals on the floor, right in the tone of the princess's hair. The Queen Mother wanted to make it look as if it were at a wedding. Such a thing shocked Beatrice, and the girl fainted. Everyone was frightened by Shroina's sudden loss of consciousness, and even called a doctor. The doctor put it down to stress and anger. It happens sometimes. All she needs is rest, and then she'll feel better. The sisters started to panic. Was she the only one dealing with the stress all this time? The sisters began to assume that it was love's longing, because love can do the same thing. The whole family was relieved because they were afraid. What if it was something serious? Thank God everything was all right. The girls decided to tell about their sister. She made such a mess. The fact that Tiabal on a date almost drowned the Emperor. She pushed him off the boat directly into the water. He was soaked to the skin. Beatrice was afraid that if there was a single scratch on him, then Tiabal would be in trouble. She would have to answer for it. The Queen Mother assured her daughter that everything was fine, and her father went to fetch the Emperor to help him. The mother assured Beatrice that all was well, and she could not worry. He was handsome, and his soul matched his appearance. He only laughed at the situation. Beatrice noticed that they were praising him strangely, as if they wanted to set them up, and judging by their satisfied faces, they did. The mother carefully put her hand on Beatrice's forehead and asked her how she was feeling. If she was all right, everyone around her cooed over her. asked if Beatrice was hungry and if she wanted anything. The girl was touched by this. No one had ever been interested in how she was, and what was there to be interested in her condition? There was not even support. Beatrice was upset. This love did not belong to her, but to Princess Shroyina. Would it be right to keep getting all this love? All the love doesn't belong to her. It belongs to Princess Shroyina. The mother looked at her daughter fondly and told her that she could trust her and tell her what's on her mind. Maybe she should tell her right now. Tell her without hiding, reveal who she is if she could. The father came running into the room. His father was all crumpled and covered in leaves. The father was terrified of what had happened to his daughter. How could it be like that? Not taking care of herself, probably not eating enough again, not taking care of herself at all. So what happened to the emperor? Everyone forgot about him. The doors opened again, and the emperor entered the room all wet. The walk was not good for him, and he is now all wet. Pushing him to the floor, Tiabal ran into the room. Her sister just casually said that she did not notice him and pushed him. She was worried about her sister. Everyone began to panic and worry about Sirethika. He was going to get sick. He was soaked to the skin. Beatrice began to worry that it was all over. Tiabal grabbed his shirt and started to wring it, saying that if he wrung it out, he wouldn't get sick, and everything would be fine. His arm jerked and the shirt ripped, unable to withstand the pressure. The torn shirt did not embarrass Tiabal in the slightest, as things happen, and it was a shame that she had done it. Everyone got upset about it, but it only made Shmerethika laugh, which Beatrice hadn't expected. Beatrice remembered how 10 years ago she had given him a rare and expensive December rose. The girl had wanted to hurt him like that, to point out to him the problems with finances in the empire and the neglect of the death of the empress. Alas, he again showed cold indifference. The man who was always closed off and cold now sat eating cookies with a satisfied look. Beatrice didn't recognize him. Their rendezvous was in the girls' room, and the Ephirians would have been horrified by this. Beatrice clutched the hem of her dress with her hands. The girl was visibly nervous, and her excitement was noticed by Sirethika. He asked what was the reason for this excitement, and Beatrice asked him to ignore it. Beatrice pretended to be more interested in how the flowers looked to him. Sirethika noted that the scent was indeed lovely, and the pink buds should bring thoughts of her to mind. Beatrice was embarrassed. This was certainly not what the girl wanted. She said the flowers were not her doing. Sirethika laughed and asked the girl if she was happy with her family. A strange question. Of course Beatrice was. Sirethika noticed that it was evident in her eyes. Beatrice sensed some imbalance in their conversation. Suddenly the man asked her if he was looking at her the way she was looking at him. His question confused the girl and embarrassed her. What did he mean? There was no such thing. Sirethika laughed and somehow bitterly told her that such a thing was unpleasant for him to hear. The man is immersed in his memories of a girl he once knew and whose name he can't forget, as if it were carved in his soul. He can't get her habits out of his mind, her way of speaking, her facial expression and gait. He can't get it out of his mind. Beatrice clutched the hem of her dress tighter. She felt the same feeling as before again. It was fear. She also knew everything about him. It was enough to hear his footsteps. Sirethika noted that she didn't look like someone he couldn't forget, but she reminded him of her. It was as if this girl had come back to life. He asked the girl if she believed in the transmigration of souls, if he could recognize her. Beatrice was frightened. Would he recognize her? But it cannot be. Even she herself does not believe what happened. It is just hard to believe. If he did recognize her, she could always deny it. Beatrice said she didn't believe in such things. Sirethika said a completely unexpected thing to the girl. She was like a baby's butt. Beatrice was angry. She was uncomfortable that she was compared to an ass. Sirethika specified that it was not just an ass, but a baby's ass. And he was a little upset that she didn't like butts. Then she's a juicy peach. She is like a peach to him, a soft and tender peach, beautiful and loved by all. But the woman he was talking about is the complete opposite. Even so, Shirina reminds him of her. Does she believe in the transmigration of souls? He doesn't believe it because he hasn't seen any proof of it. Sirethika came very close to Beatrice and took her chin. She could feel his breath, a little more, and he would kiss her. Suddenly the whole family piled into the room. Beatrice wasn't too pleased that they were trying to listen in on the conversation. Not that they wanted to know the conversation. They were wondering what they were going to do. The sisters began to insist that they kiss, and then they would leave. The mother came into the room and angrily told the king that it was high time he grew up, and led her daughters and her husband out of Beatrice's room. Beatrice began apologizing to Sirethika, assuring him that it was not out of malice. They just liked to poke their noses in other people's business. Sirethika agreed with her. He knew that, and if they were being disrespectful, he wouldn't be so calm. They were fun, and Sirethika understood why a quiet girl like Shiorina liked them. Beatrice said that she needed rest and was tired, and Sirethika told her that he understood, when she covered the king with herself, and worst of all, he told her her real name. Sirethika recognized her. She had clutched her dresses like this before, making all her clothes wrinkled. The girl tried to convince him that he was wrong, but alas, he would not even listen. He wished she wasn't afraid of him. Sirethika wouldn't hurt her. He wouldn't hurt her. She was the only one who could make him smile. For 10 years he had studied her. How could he not recognize Beatrice? Why couldn't he forget her? Forget the girl who tried to kill him? Sirethika gently held her hand. She must tell him that he was wrong. He was wrong. Beatrice lowered her head and confessed it to him. He was right. Here we go again. He does what he wants, and Beatrice gives it to him. How did he know she wasn't Shroina? He recognized her as soon as he saw her, the way she stood in front of the sword, her look saying it all for her. Beatrice wished he would let go of her hand, but he didn't think so. Sirethik held her, still just as gently, afraid he would lose her. Well, and he recognized it because he actually had good instincts, that's right. He missed her so much. He had missed her all this time. Beatrice pulled her hand out, and his hand hung in the air. The girl thought he'd hit his head. Sirethika looks at his hand and says he remembers who they were. But does it really matter now? What was happening didn't change the fact that he missed them. The emperor put his hand on her shoulder, glad she had returned. His warm voice was a reminder of the last words Sirethika had spoken to her, telling her that she had cured his loneliness. Beatrice couldn't understand why, but she felt happy. Suddenly the man told her that they had unfinished business, and that was their marriage. He was serious, and no matter how much the girl denied it, he saw only her as his wife. Beatrice thought he was crazy. They fought all the time. How could he see her as his wife? They were enemies, and enemies can't be together. Sirethika wondered why they couldn't be together. Does she want to kill him? Does she hate him? How will she kill him in this tiny body? She is no longer Martian. There is no animosity. She is a princess, and they can be together. Beatrice told him that just the obstacle is there, the lack of love. How from enemies can they be in love? This is just silly. Sirethika asked her if she didn't like him, and Beatrice said she didn't. Not that she didn't. The girl didn't know what to say next, and why did she say that? Sirethika didn't see the problem at all. He wanted her to look at him as a man, as a spouse. The girl kicked him out of the room and closed herself off. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard, but Sirethika assured her that she wouldn't give up so easily. He didn't want to lose her again, and let her remember that. Beatrice became agitated, and it was all because of him. When she was Martian, she had a lot of obligations. She was always just a tool. That's why she had no experience in love. Sirethika told her he would find out from her sisters how to get her. Beatrice is terrified that she'll have to go through this again. What does he want to know from them? Beatrice ran out of the room, but she didn't see him. He was gone. Beatrice realized that he was glad to see her, but to ask her to marry him was nonsense. She decided that it was better not to think about it. Sirethika came to Beatrice's house with flowers in his hands. He asked her what she was dreaming about, and she told him that Beatrice was covered in flowers and laughing. Beatrice thought that she looked like a weakling. Beatrice wonders why Sirethika is doing this. Has he been switched too? Does he even realize he's being weird? Sirethika only answered that he is trying to be a good husband, for Beatrice cannot believe it. The girl cannot believe her eyes that this cold man in full parade brought her flowers. The sisters noticed the couple and were happy for them. Sirethika said that flowers were the best expression of affection. Beatrice wondered where he got them. It turned out that the man collected them himself, with his own hands. Lily began to insist that Beatrice take the flowers. Beatrice had no choice but to take the flowers. The girl asked him not to come so early again. She had to clean herself up and wake up. Siraithika made a sad face and asked if he could visit her at other times of the day. Beatrice agreed and asked him to leave now. Siraithika agreed and left. The man only made it clear to Beatrice that they would meet later. Lily asked Beatrice when they had gotten so close that they started calling each other by their first names. Lily looked pleased that she thought she would take the lead in the bet and decided to spread the good news, but Beatrice's requests were ignored. Beatrice decided not to tell Lily that she had turned down the marriage proposal yet. Beatrice began to remember that very moment when Siritika gave her the gift. The girl felt some movement behind her back, and suddenly she was covered with a blanket of some kind. It turns out it was her sisters. They wanted to kidnap her to find out what's between her and Siraithika, and it's better for her to tell her everything straight, because he's acting so strange, and asked them for advice on how to take care of her. So they wanted to find out more from her sister. Beatrice was amazed that he was asking how to woo her. How could a humble girl be held hostage to the emperor's love? Beatrice thought that she shouldn't have sent him away so rudely, and one shouldn't do that. Princesses behave like bandits. Beatrice decided to come clean, that he proposed to her, but she turned him down, that's all. Alas, the sisters thought she was making him chase her, so the emperor would suffer a little. What's the joy of following the emperor's script, right? The sisters have a lot to learn. But she should know that the emperor hasn't been intimate with women in all 5 years. He was too busy fixing the empire's affairs. That's why he has reached such heights. Though he is a tough warrior, he is incredibly attentive, noticing every little thing and detail. He is kind and even smiled at a girl from a simple family who gave him flowers. Underneath that cold face hides a kind and decent man. Beatrice wondered, if he was such a good man, why didn't the sisters start running after him? After all, they were interested in him. The sisters did not reply anything to this, only hugged Beatrice and told her that she was too timid and should recognize his feelings. They already felt sorry for him. All this time he hadn't taken his eyes off her. From the very first time they met, he looked only at her, and the sisters wanted to know what kind of man he was. They didn't want to give their sister to him, in case he was a tyrant. Even though he's smarmy, they wanted to have a good man by their sister's side. But now they know it's all right. Suddenly, while walking, Beatrice heard someone's voice asking her if she loved the emperor. The voice was familiar. It seemed to be Schreiner asking. But she was nowhere to be seen. The girl was frightened. She froze in incomprehension. What was it? He was carrying a load of peaches. He knew that she loved them very much. Beatrice was worried because he was allergic to peaches, so he was not surprised that it was itchy. Beatrice took the peaches from him. She couldn't swear at him, especially in those moments when he looked at her with that loving look. Now she understood what her sisters meant. His gaze had always been her weakness, and she couldn't be angry with him. In a quiet village lived a girl. She was engaged in flowers. Her name was Cherry Blanche. One day she made a wish to grow a blue flower, because blue colour brings good luck. It seemed to her that such a flower would make her happy. One day she managed to grow such a flower, but the joy did not last long. Soon people found out about her miracle. Cherry had to flee from greedy strangers who were after her and the rose. Beatrice pondered tearing herself away from reading, the author of a book from Solemn, a story about a girl growing blue roses, somehow not original. Recently, Beatrice had started reading love novels. After all, her whole life has been spent behind textbooks. It's not surprising that she'd be drawn to new stories. She didn't know anything about love before, but now she's beginning to understand something. Beatrice wondered, is love like in books? How could love be understood scientifically? The book Beatrice was reading was called The Blue Rose and the Oriental Wizard, a popular book not only in Solemn, but in other kingdoms as well. Lily read so many books to find it. It would be nice to thank her afterward. Beatrice understood why the book was popular. Cherry was so cute. There was a knock. Beatrice didn't know who it could be, but Siraithika came out to meet her. The girl hid the book behind her back and asked him what he wanted. Siraithika only said that the maid was right. Beatrice had fallen in love with love affairs. Beatrice fell into a slight stupor. Well, what kind of love stories could there be? She would never confess to him, even if he started torturing her. Sirethika told Beatrice that she had no need to hide it, but anyway, he had something for her. Behind the emperor's back were carts of books. It was clear that he wanted to give them to her. He was inspired by her passion for love stories and decided to make her happy. Beatrice only concluded that Lily was reporting everything to him, so she was going to get it. Sirethika brought her all the love stories that had been published in Erfinen, and when asked how, he told Beatrice that it was through the portals. Beatrice was angry. How many taxes had been wasted? But if so, it would be the last time. The man looked at her so pitifully that Beatrice melted. She had always had a weakness for his eyes. She was becoming so defenseless. Since he had brought all these things, let Beatrice at least look at them. Beatrice decided to agree with him. She started to study books and saw that there was a new novel by the author whose work she was reading now. Beatrice was happy. The author is very popular that even abroad buy his books. The girl asked Sirethika to take all these books to her room because there were so many of them. Sirethika was very happy about her request. His joy embarrassed Beatrice, so much so that her ears began to burn. Beatrice was reading a book at night by candlelight. In the book it was about Cherry being approached by a man and asked if she was the one who grew blue roses. These roses are no different than any other roses, to which Cherry objected. She was just looking for happiness, and he replied that she was looking in the wrong place. Beatrice thought about it. She had been happy the last few days. She didn't quite understand his phrase. Beatrice pondered. The happier she became, the more anxious she became. How long would it last? What happens if the family finds out she's not Schreiner? Or if the princess's soul returns to her body? What would happen to Beatrice then? What about Sirethika? Beatrice didn't think she would be able to sleep tonight. Better go for a walk. Beatrice saw Sirethika on the balcony. What is he doing here? And why did he look like he was about to cry?